Good morning. I'm Cristina Sanchez-Kerr, and as some of you know, prior to coming to the UCC, I came from the Catholic faith, and this story is about my devoutly Catholic grandmother. And it may seem very cliche to have chosen my grandmother from the many women that have influenced my life, but I found it surprising that that was the first person that popped in my head. And being a busy mother of three, I just went with that and I said, okay, I've got it covered. So I found it surprising because for the first 10, 12 years of my life, I actually didn't have a good relationship with my grandmother. And this is a story about how I discovered recently that we had a different recollection of why that change happened and why we do have a good relationship now. So back in October, she turned 90, and on her 90th birthday, lots of family members were not well, and so it was a very small gathering on that particular day to celebrate her birthday. We took her to lunch, and after we sang and blew out the candles, I reached over because she was right next to me, and though she's not an emotional or sappy person by any means, I am, and I wanted her to know in that moment how grateful I was that she, despite her physical struggles, was mentally completely with us, and that her presence in my life was one I was very grateful for, and that I kind of poked fun at myself and said, I'm really grateful I wised up and saw how much I had to learn from you, and that we had a turning point in our relationship is something I'm very, very grateful took place early on so that I had the benefit of learning from you. And she giggled a little and said, do you still have that book? And I paused and was very confused. And she said, you know, I never thought that a book of short, humorous stories would have been the key, but I really hope that you still remember those stories and that you have that book somewhere. And I knew what book she was talking about, and I knew what situation she was referring to. But I let her know, grandmother, it was not the stories that you read to me when I was 10, 11 years old that allowed me to see that you had quite a sense of humor and that that was a moment of connecting with her, but that wasn't the turning point in our relationship. And she looked very surprised when I said that, but she really, I could tell, wanted to know because all of these decades she thought that was it, that was the thing that had done it. But it was actually, I shared with her, when I was 13, I went to Japan on a student exchange program for 3 weeks. And it was the first time, not only that I had been away from my family for that long, but I was very, very far away from my family. And being there really by myself, I felt completely lost and very alone. And though I had a very wonderful host family, I found myself for the first time praying voluntarily and searching for some connection, some safety. And coming back from that trip, it was the first time that I really understood why the grandmother that up until then I had only seen as this very proper, you know, don't go out without having a full proper attire and makeup, and went to church 5 days a week and was a Sunday school teacher and just seemed very rigid and much too religious for my taste as a 10-year-old. I finally understood why religion played such a large part in her life. I understood it now as faith and not as religion, being what she was really trying to pass on to other people and to her family, and that faith that she had been the compass that had gotten her through being a single mother of 4, having lost a 5th child in infancy, having come from central northern Mexico by herself with young children, and going back and forth between Tijuana and Los Angeles to work in factories and fields so that she could support them, that faith she had was the way that she got through, and the way that she knew that as hard as things always were, and to some degree continue to be in her life, that things were going to be okay, and that she just had to persevere, and that there was love at the end of all of it. And she teared up. She's not one to do that. She laughed it off a little bit, but I could tell that she really felt the connection that bonded us, and that she probably felt a little bit grateful that not only did I understand her in a different way, but I understood something about her that was central, and that she had in fact passed on a very important skill, a very important way of looking at the world that had helped her survive, and that I think she knew would help me and my family as we face our own struggles year after year. And that is something that I learned from my grandmother, was my faith and having a compass, and lots of other wonderful things, but it was that understanding that really opened up the rest of her knowledge to me. Thank you.
So I'm going to share a story today about my high school choir director, Mrs. Ledeen. So I agreed to Reverend Darryl's request to share a story on this Sunday before I really had an idea in mind of who to actually talk about. And then I've shared with Darryl that, as I was thinking back through my life, that what was interesting about it, but maybe is kind of not for the purposes of today, was that I really had trouble finding a specific woman, at least on a first pass, that I felt had kind of influenced my spirituality. So I spent a few weeks drawing a blank like this and kind of regretting that I had agreed to do this and starting to panic a little bit. And then I was like, wow, I really need to figure this out, or it's going to be pretty bad. So I followed the advice of someone that I don't remember who exactly told me this, but sort of when you're kind of getting stuck like that, just try to go back to the basics and remind yourself of those, and then just sort of see what happens. So I did that, and I said, well, if someone asks me, like, what does spirituality mean to me, what is it? I guess there's many answers to this, and probably each of our individual answers change throughout our lives, and maybe we hold multiple answers at the same time. But I think for me, currently, what I thought is, what does it mean to have a spiritual life? It means to sort of try to keep alive a sense of sort of meaning, like what is the point of all this? What is the point of life? What does it mean? And at least one of the answers that one could give, or that I would give to myself right now, is that I think it's these enduring sentiments in life where you have sort of touched the lives of others somehow, and they've touched you, and whether that would be sort of family or friendship or enterprises in which you're engaged with others, that this is kind of the thing that sort of sticks with you and provides an additional sense of what is it all about. And that can be, when you're alive, there are maybe our individual objects of affection, or they're the people who benefit from the things that we do because we love them and they have some purpose. And then maybe, after we're no longer here, the way that we were to these individuals, maybe directly or indirectly, kind of still lives on in them and in their lives, and that kind of provides meaning to others then after we are gone. So that was my back to basics. Now, who helped me come to that? And then which women specifically helped me kind of come to that? And so then I just kind of cycled through chronologically, and then the minute I thought of Mrs. Ledeen, that kind of popped out correctly. So she was my choir instructor, both when I was, in my church and also in school. And so I was exposed to her probably throughout my teenage years, 10 or 11 to 18. And another thing I thought that was interesting about who she is and who she was in my life was that why I didn't think of her kind of initially. And maybe this says a little bit about different ways in which people can help you in terms of spiritual formation. I think I didn't initially think of her because she didn't really occupy sort of like a formal role of spiritual guidance. She wasn't a minister, she wasn't a Sunday school teacher, etc. She wasn't my mother, things like that. But she did sort of contribute through sort of what she did to sort of formation. And what I mean by that is that maybe not all the ways in which one learns how to be spiritual happen, in either a building like this that's a church or a building that's your home. There's other opportunities for that, and there's other ways that can happen in somebody's life. So I think the best way to illustrate that, how Mrs. Ledeen, my choir instructor, did that, is sort of through a story. I remember when I was in, I think a freshman or sophomore in high school, I was in a musical. And she, of course, was she was the director of the musical. She was the, everything musical teacher. And the best part about this musical was that I was in this musical with a girl that I developed a crush on. And this was pretty awesome, because then this was like 6 weeks where I was with her like every day for like 2 hours after school. And that was really, as a 14-year-old boy, that was just about the pinnacle of life. And I remember after like the last rehearsal for the first performance, because I was also an athlete, I had been designated to clean up all the chairs and everything. And I was putting away chairs, and all of a sudden out of the blue, Mrs. Ledeen says to me that I was about to lose my time with this girl, that the musical was going to end, and that maybe I ought to think about not sitting on the fence and actually stop being an observer and get in there in life and actually participate and start being a part of her life in some real way. And then so immediately this was just horribly embarrassing that, a teacher, an adult tells you this and you're like, oh my God, this is horrible. But I also knew she was right. And I actually think, it's funny actually that even to this day, I can still, there's often we all have these times in life where sometimes we're just observers or we're passive, and sometimes we need someone to sort of, some kind of impetus to actually kind of get in there and participate. And I still, not so much to think of her exact words, but I think of the spirit of that conversation a lot of times in my life. And then also, of course, that was, a time, maybe it sounds a bit trivial, but that led to my first kiss in life. And I still remember that kind of connection with another person, in kind of a really meaningful way. I remember how it looked and felt and smelled and all those kinds of things. And I think as maybe almost like a metaphor in one's own life, it lets you imagine how well you can actually connect with another person if you sort of take advantage of those opportunities. So when I think back to that time, that's just one example of kind of who she was in my life. And I think back, and when I think about it through that lens, then I can think of a lot of times when I had sort of the experience of kind of really good sort of joy in something that I was doing or connection with another person, kind of in human relationship. It wasn't so much, obviously she was just specifically a music teacher, but I think also by kind of who she was and kind of how she was it. She really enabled these times when you could learn, maybe not in the moment, but maybe as you look back on it, that this kind of human connection was really what mattered. Like, this is really what was going to stick with you. And in a way, to me, that's very sort of spiritual. And that was kind of how I would sum up kind of how she was spiritually forming. She was a person who, just by how she was and how she lived, kind of created an environment where you could sort of go beyond sort of what the surface world is of like school and jobs and work and a paycheck and, following traffic laws and all that kind of thing, to something deeper than that, something parallel, where it's really like this parallel universe of life where those things all happen, but they're kind of the surface. But the point of it is really more around that connection with all these people in your lives, whether they're close or far, and that really is that's really the point of it all in the end, and that's really what's going to stick, and that's really why you do things, And so, and she, I would say, was unique in that way because she was a person who I didn't really have anybody else to do that for me for kind of complicated family reasons, and she was a person who stepped into that gap, maybe not even deliberately or intentionally, maybe she wasn't even aware that she did it, but she was a person who filled that gap by who she was and kind of created that environment where I could learn those lessons. And so I think, for me, I'll always be grateful to this woman, Mrs. Ledeen, for not only those 30 seconds of just horrible, horrible teenage embarrassment, but also sort of from all the other things that only later kind of flowed from sort of the sort of perspective and spiritual growth or lens that she really inspired for me. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Kathy, and I can tell that you don't know me that well because I cry at the national anthem. Does it make me go last? Not so nice, but I'll try to do the best I can. I'm here to talk about my godmother, Edie Bybee. By the time I was born, she already had 8 children, and I think a couple grandchildren. And my mom had a back problem and was made worse when she carried me and never really walked again. She was in a wheelchair and an invalid and had lots of health problems throughout my whole childhood, in and out of the hospital, pretty much from the time I remember till when she died when I was 21. Well, Edie was always there. And when I was about 7, she had her 9th child, Paul, who was born with Down syndrome. So by now she had about 10 or 12 grandchildren. She had Paul, and she had me and actually my older brothers as well. She cared for all of us. The story of Edie is, and I can only imagine this, I can only make this up. She, to deal with her children, and then Paul and her husband, who was my godfather, who was an awesome guy, but very needy. Her days were probably filled like this. She was probably up by the crack of dawn, getting her household ready, getting the other children that were still at home out and about, and somewhere along the line, about 9:30, she would remember to jump in her car from Spring Valley and drive to El Cajon to take me to my dentist appointment. Those are the kind of things she would do. She came to our house at least once a week to iron my dad's shirts. He was a school teacher, and she would make us dinner for that night. I don't know when she did that or how she did that, but she did. When I needed a costume, it was there. She was there for a fitting. She would come back. She would make it again. She took me to dance lessons. She went to all my recitals and all of her children's as well. And my guess is all of her grandchildren's. She was there to bake me birthday cakes. She was there at my college graduation. She was always there. She loved me like a daughter. She was there in the really simple times, and she was there in the really important times. And, see, told you. What she told me was through her sustained giving through many years, she showed me what a strong woman does to shed her life on others.